so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness which creates and animates all things. After years of exploring this awe-inspiring truth on this podcast, I'm super excited to announce that we are now going even deeper down the rabbit hole on the new late-night style consciousness-elevating talk show called Optimistic, which features none other than you, the listeners. Optimistic is taped out of the epic, spaceship-esque 8-bedroom property we call the Mystic Manor that myself and the rest of the Optimistic crew now navigate reality from in Venice Beach, California. And you are invited to come experience a Mystic Manor immersion week with us. During your week-long stay, you'll enjoy unique workshops, chef-prepared meals, one-on-one time coaching and consulting with me, and even co-creating magic with me as a guest on both Optimistic and an episode of the Positive Head podcast. When I started this, my aim with these immersive retreats was to facilitate the ultimate spiritual upgrade and tune-up, so to speak, for our guests while providing them with one of the most memorable experiences of their lives. And I'm happy to say that as of this recording, every guest at the end of their trip so far has told me that they have had a profound and transformational experience at the Mystic Manor and that they definitely want to come back. All that being said, we only have a limited number of spots available between now and next July. And as of this recording, about half of those spots are already filled. So if there's any part of you that is screaming, yes, I want to come, I feel like I need to be there, go now and book a slot with me to discuss how we can put our heads together and make it happen at calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. I know for some people, there is also that little voice in their head saying, why not? I can't get off work. I can't afford it, and on and on and on. But, really Henry Ford, I think, said it best. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And I'm confident that where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm personally committed to doing everything in my power, including discounts and payment plans, to get you here if it is something that truly feels like a huge yes for you energetically and like you're meant to be here. Once again, the link to book time to discuss with me is calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. That's spelled calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. All one word, of course. And book in some time and look forward to seeing you soon here at the Mystic Manor.
All right, all you positive heads, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm here on an off day. It's a magical Monday, filling in for Brandon because he's off doing something super magical that I'm not going to tell you about. I'm going to let him tell you all about it when he gets back. I'm pretty excited to hear all about it myself. So today, I thought I would get back into Caroline Myss's book, Sacred Contracts, because I left out a pretty big part of it. And I did that because I knew I was going to get back to it. So today we're going to do part 3 of Sacred Contracts. The first part was episode 1018, and the second part was episode 1020. And this part that I left out is very important because it involves our shadow and working with our shadow, confronting our shadow, accepting our shadow. Very, very important along this spiritual journey. We've all heard that complaint about the quote unquote new age where everything is love and light and butterflies. Well, it is, But we also need to look at the hard stuff too. And when we can look at the hard stuff and shine the light on it and come back to that place of total love and oneness, that's when this journey gets super magical. So we got to look at our shadows. And I love Caroline Myss for this because she's just amazing. So I'm reading from chapter 4 of Sacred Contracts. And this section is called Living in the Shadow. Although our archetypal patterns are essentially neutral, they do have both light and shadow aspects. The word shadow itself suggests a dark, secretive, possibly malevolent countenance that looms in the background of our nature, ready to do harm to others as well as to ourselves. A much more appropriate understanding of the shadow aspects of our archetypes, however, is that they represent the part of our being that is least familiar to our conscious mind. Whether the shadow becomes our friend or enemy depends largely upon ourselves, wrote Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's closest colleague and confidant. The shadow is not necessarily always an opponent. In fact, it is exactly like any human being with whom one has to get along, sometimes by giving in, sometimes by resisting, sometimes by giving love. Whatever the situation requires, the shadow becomes hostile only when it is ignored or misunderstood. The Queen is among my own personal family of archetypes. For example, it serves me well when I'm teaching a workshop. I have to be certain that everything I need so that I can work at my peak is ready when I need it. From my travel accommodations to the whiteboard I write on, even a cup of tea with honey to soothe my throat from all the talking. My Queen makes darn sure everything is just as it's supposed to be, or heads will roll. At other times, when I least expect it, my shadow queen can make an appearance and start demanding things in an inappropriate way. Often, I'm not aware of my queen's agenda until after she's come and gone. It remains in the shadow until I take a good look at whatever damage it may have done. I'll never forget the time I blew up at a couple of airline ticket agents because my flight had been delayed, and I felt they weren't being straight with us passengers. As I stormed off in disgust, a young couple who had been waiting in line behind me caught my eye and came over. I thought they were going to thank me for speaking out, but instead the man said, "We just wanted to tell you how much we love your workshops." "Yes," the woman said, "we have all your books and tapes." I wanted to tell them that they'd just seen a textbook example of the Shadow Queen in action, but I was too humiliated to say anything. I just thanked them and kept on walking. It was about what I deserved for attacking a couple airline employees who were probably just doing their jobs. The shadow aspects of our archetypes are fed by our paradoxical relationship to power. We are as intimidated by being empowered as we are by being disempowered. That disempowerment is a threat to our well-being is easy to understand, at least at the surface level. But why should we also fear becoming empowered? That, in essence, is the paradox that feeds the shadow. The shadow can be seen as unexplored power. It expresses itself through behavior that often sabotages our express wishes and image of ourselves. These complex aspects of our personalities filter into our behavior by outwitting our conscious minds, after which they often assume a dominant role. We frequently don't know why we do the things we do, or why we have to cope with inexplicable fears. This leads to painful conflict when we feel one way and act another, separating the mind and heart. Living with the mind and heart divided is like having two battle encampments within, each one fighting for authority over our power of choice. When isolated from each other, the heart and mind are each handicapped. The mind tends to become hyper-rational, and the heart overly emotional. This imbalance of forces fragments our power, and like a nation in which opposing forces are constantly at war with each other, when our nature is fragmented, it is vulnerable to being dominated by fear. As Jesus said, "If a kingdom is divided against itself, it cannot stand." Even when we know we are acting fearfully, we sometimes choose to be willfully ignorant about it. If I don't know why I'm acting in a negative fashion, then it is easier to excuse my behavior or blame someone else. But if I am aware, both emotionally and intellectually, that I am harming another being, I not only have to hold myself accountable, I must also admit that I consciously choose to be negative. I can no longer hide behind the state of confusion created by the split between heart and mind. As long as your mind and heart lack a channel of clear communication, you will be confused about what to do with your life. Inevitably, as soon as you make contact with your life's passion, which can mean finding your vocation, your life partner, or even your sexual identity, you are going to experience a kind of spiritual suffering until you act on that passion. That suffering is actually a form of divine motivation, encouraging you to pursue a more authentic life. Awareness of a greater truth adds time pressure to your psyche and spirit, because the more you know, the faster you need to respond to that truth. I call this spiritual accountability. If you realize that negative judgments, including judging yourself, cause harm, then you must reevaluate your behavior as soon as you realize that you are being judgmental. You also need to recognize when you are justifying yourself and your actions. Judging others and creating excuses while knowing better are only two of the spiritual challenges that will arise as you work with your survival archetypes. The more aware you are of the demands of managing your consciousness, the fewer hiding places will be available in your psyche and soul for the shadow play of the child, victim, prostitute, and saboteur. This relationship between awareness and responsibility also applies to your health. Once you become aware of how toxic anger or guilt is to your body and spirit, the consequences of these energy poisons become more pronounced than if you did not know better. If for no other reason than that you now know their biological effects. This is negative visualization in action. I'm going to pause here and give a little commentary on that, because what this reminds me of actually is a couple posts on the Positive Heads Facebook group about road rage. And I can't tell you how many times I've thought about road rage and how driving is like a metaphor for life. I mean, it is in our dreams, right? And when we're driving a car, it's a metaphor for our life. So it's true in this dream of life too, that the way that we drive, the way that we react is a great way to learn about ourselves. It's a great way to learn about others. And when you sit back and you think about everything is energy, my thoughts matter, whatever I am emanating is spreading out to the world. And since we know that, it matters. It's our personal responsibility to not put out toxicity, right? And where I learn this the most is when I'm driving, because we have a tendency to be impatient or get angry if somebody cuts us off, But more and more, I have to check myself and not allow that energy out into the world, because I have a responsibility. We all have a responsibility to put out as much love as we can. Look at that shadow aspect of yourself and give it love. And then give that mirror some love too. How much different is your driving experience going to be if you just give every single person who cuts you off a big smooch and a big hug and just send them love, right? Metaphorically, instead of flipping them the bird and sending them all that anger. Not helping yourself, not helping them, not helping the world, right? We have a responsibility because we know this. And a great way to learn about ourselves. Okay, back to the book. The Shadow and Your Divine Potential. Jesus said to his disciples about his miraculous healing abilities, "All this you shall do and more if you have faith." The Buddha's enlightenment not only allowed him to view his past lives, going back aeons, but to become omniscient as well. Yet he also told his followers that with diligence, they could achieve enlightenment, and he urged them to be lamps unto yourselves. These enlightened beings saw our highest potential as virtually unlimited. They were not necessarily referring to learning how to walk on water or effect miraculous cures, however, but to the fact that we can become as trusting of the divine as they. The Buddha, for example, insisted that his followers discover who they would be if they called their spirits back from attaching to the illusions of the external world. And Jesus said, "Unto you it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God. Do you bring in a lamp to put it under a bushel or a bed? Instead, don't you put it on its stand? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open." To engage in the journey that takes us from living outside of ourselves to processing the world inside ourselves means bringing light to our shadow. Your shadow aspects are primarily rooted in fear patterns that have more control over your behavior than does your conscious mind. This limits your ability to make choices in which you are aware of your motivations. Your shadow self includes emotional and psychological patterns that come from repressed feelings that you do not wish to deal with consciously for fear of the consequences. For example, rather than face the fact that your partner is in some kind of trouble or your child is using drugs, you may repress those strong, accurate instincts, possibly with disastrous results, and you may become short-tempered, angry, and depressed without realizing why. Your shadow also contains the secrets why you would sabotage the opportunities that come your way. People often tell me that they have a fear of success. When I ask them to explain where that fear came from, many draw a blank. They have no idea why they have that fear. They just do. Having an unknown force controlling so much of the creative expression of our lives is a shadow. Eventually, we will have to confront each of our shadow aspects. This exploration into our shadow is so complex that it may be one reason why Eastern philosophy maintains that we need many lifetimes to achieve liberation. Your highest potential, then, is that part of you that is not limited in its expression by the fears of the physical world and the business of living. It is what you actualize when you are willing to confront your shadow, openly acknowledge the reality of its presence within you, and then take steps to deal with it. To rely on your own inner resources and follow your inner guidance before all else is to express your highest potential at all times. It shows you who you would be if you could live consistently within the knowledge that genuine power exists inside the self and never outside of it. Confronting your shadow requires that you strike out on your own. That isn't to say that you can't receive help from friends, therapists, and wise counselors, but you will have to make choices that exclude the collective needs of your family, tribe, or group and separate yourself from them. If you decide to follow an inner call and its unavoidable psychic ritual of separation, you have to withdraw your spirit from the magnetic field created by the collective power of your group's will so that you can organize your own energy, much as a mystic or seer might withdraw to hear divine promptings, like Jesus going into the desert or Muhammad to the cave of Mount Hira. This process of birthing your own power requires that you put yourself first, even though this may appear to the outside world to be selfish. During your separation, you will have to face the most narcissistic aspects of your ego, such as the shadow child, who is concerned only with its own well-being and will try to scare you back into the fold. Your shadow victim, meanwhile, revels in its victimhood and will entice you to feel sorry for yourself for ever leaving. The shadow prostitute will urge you to sell out your integrity and your vision of true independence at the first opportunity. And the shadow saboteur will play into your suspicions that you just aren't good enough to accomplish anything on your own. You will have to strengthen your soul identity until it is strong enough to eclipse all of these fears. You are birthing your power of individual choice, increasing your potential for insight and for opportunities serving your highest potential. In dealing with the shadows, you ready yourself to accept full responsibility for the management of your spirit and the consequences of your choices. Shadow contracts. Just as your archetypes are neither good or bad, so too your sacred contract is essentially a neutral force. One person's contract is not more important to the universe than another's. Every contract is essentially the same in that it covers what each individual needs to learn in his lifetime. For that reason, we are put in places and in roles that best serve our contracts, whether that means we are born into royalty or poverty or somewhere in between. Whether you find yourself in a life filled with challenges such as serious illness, injury, or war, or whether your life is relatively free of trauma, you will have agreements to keep and a contract to fulfill. As the Tibetan Buddhist teacher Sogyal Rinpoche likes to say, there is poor people suffering and rich people suffering. Don't envy others because you can't know the extent of their suffering just by looking at externals. Whatever your material lot in life, any external difficulties are vehicles for you to work on your internal challenges. On some level, it's obviously much easier to be rich than poor, but even the prosperous cannot sidestep their inner challenges or their appointment in Samara. In this regard, people often ask me if a contract can include an agreement to commit murder, rape, or other heinous crimes. Could Hitler, Stalin, Mao, or Pol Pot have had contracts to murder millions of people? Questions about such enormous villainy are difficult to answer, but no, these criminals did not have a divine order to kill. It may be that some people have agreed to a life in which they encounter dark forces and have to choose how to deal with them. As each of us is growing individually, we are also all evolving collectively. Each of us has a dark side, along with our own grace and light. The extent to which we can acknowledge the former while maximizing the latter may determine how we choose to fulfill the terms of our contract. When the shadow side takes over even one person, the consequences are tragically felt by many. What is in one is in the whole. Murder and torture occur because humanity as a group does not yet sufficiently value life in all its expressions. Perhaps that lack of a sacred vision leads to the incarnating of bleak and brutal experiences. We all share a potential for becoming either the instigator or the victim of harm, whether physical or emotional. What we do to heal the victim and the aggressor within ourselves is the universal contribution we can each make toward healing the whole. So, interjecting again. So this reminds me of the two wolves. We have the angel on one side, the devil on the other. We have an angry wolf, we have a loving wolf. Which wolf do we feed? Which one do we choose to listen to? We both have each one on our shoulders. How much opportunity do we give each one to speak? And how much do we decide to listen to the one that serves us? And back to Caroline Myss, confronting the shadow. Learning to confront and ultimately manage your shadow, no matter how daunting it may appear, is an essential step on your road to spiritual maturity. Lucy's life is one illustration of how your world can change once you decide that you, and not your shadow, will create your future. Lucy spent years trying to please everyone but herself, which is hardly a rare dilemma. I have read a few books years ago about a woman who decided one day just to pack up a few belongings and take to the road without a map or a personal agenda, Lucy told me. She was just going to take her life one day at a time, and I was filled with envy when I read that. Her story made me feel like a prisoner, and from that moment on I was miserable. It wasn't my job, it wasn't my family. It was me and my belief that everyone's happiness depended on my being in their lives. I encouraged their dependency, and at the same time I resented every one of them. Lucy realized that she was determined to control every person under her care because by keeping them dependent on her, she would not have to face her own weaknesses. She could tell herself that her family members were the children or victims, and she was in charge of the tribe. The anger that would erupt in her when their problems got to be too much was her inner self attempting to communicate to her that she was using her power to prevent people from taking charge of their own lives. Her fear of not being needed caused her to fear their independence, and yet their lack of independence caused her to resent their weaknesses. Many people fear their own empowerment and unconsciously encourage their shadow to thrive. This happens in particular when conscious empowerment represents change, which can be terrifying. Change signals loss of control and entry into the unknown. But even beyond fear of change, empowerment represents isolation, which people will do anything to avoid. Perhaps this is the very core of our paradoxical view of empowerment. Our image of awakening to and fulfilling our divine potential evokes the idea of an individual who is whole and complete, separated from lesser mortals, isolated and alone. Culturally, we have yet to envision a realistic, appealing model of the spiritually empowered human being, someone who is simultaneously vulnerable, capable of sensual love, and worthy of a mate. We believe that enlightened people don't have the same needs or vulnerabilities that we do, or the same shadows. We also believe that enlightened people don't age, don't suffer, or mourn. I've seen the archetype of the whole perfected human at work countless times in people. You would think that someone with her occupation would be above such emotions, people say when a spiritual role model is shown to have feet of clay. Or, you should see the way he lives. He's anything but celibate. We do not want to be whole if it means being alone, and we do not want enlightenment if it requires living as an ascetic. So deep within our unconscious, we feed the energy of the saboteur, that part of ourselves that maintains our shadow pattern and fuels our fragmentation. We fear our own empowerment because it represents changes in our lives that would remove us from the warmth of those who love us for being vulnerable. And we fear being empowered because then we can no longer claim that we are not responsible for our actions. Although we want to be around a person who is enlightened or consciously working on becoming enlightened, we deeply fear the high price of our own enlightenment will make us pay. Assuming personal responsibility for the quality not only of our actions, but also of our attitudes is a lifetime discipline. We cannot rest in the harbor of blame, so we unconsciously and sometimes consciously encourage our own weaknesses and hold on to our fears. As long as becoming enlightened represents isolation for us, we will shun our own empowerment. We fear to realize our highest potential, and this inevitably affects our creative, financial, and career potential. After you introduced me to this idea, a man named Maury told me, I started to look at each person in my life as representing some power in me that I needed to realize. This perspective was naturally far more useful when it came to dealing with those individuals with whom I knew I had a power struggle. But still, I became observant of exactly what made me feel powerless in certain relationships, and I would then study that feeling in me. I thought about how I would change were I to fill in that part of me with self-esteem, for instance. In each case, I could see immediately that my life would change dramatically with each choice I made to respond consciously to every interaction I had. In one case, I was with a friend who was celebrating his new membership to a very exclusive country club. I don't have the income required to belong to that place, and my first response was envy. I resented his being able to afford the type of life he has. But then, I separated from him and turned the mirror on me. I confronted the fact that he represented a kind of power that I had not developed, and that the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my resentment went beyond just that description. I had to admit that I resented the fact that he had the discipline to go the extra mile to mature that power in him. Whereas I was more inclined to look for reasons to knock off early from work, he saw everything as an opportunity and did all he could with his job. My resentment had nothing to do with money. It had to do with the manner in which he managed his potential. Maury chose to respond to his feelings of envy about his country club friend by recognizing that they were the consequence of his own power deficits. He separated his shadow responses from his feelings of friendship. He realized that he resented the power his friend had to maximize his potential and appreciate all the opportunities life had to offer. And he was finally able to unearth his deepest resentment, which was that his friend could handle rapid changes in life, whereas he needed to have things move slowly because he was so afraid of losing control. His friend had faith in the unknown, but for Maury, it was fraught with danger. Because Mari could analyze his shadow responses through his archetypal patterns, he was able to realize that his saboteur and child within were in fact extending him an invitation to realize his potential. On yet another level, Mari decided to work through an issue with his friend with whom he had had a contract to support his own empowerment. So isn't that a way better way to look at these shadow aspects and these contracts that we have with our friends or relatives or in relationships of any kind when they're challenging, that they are there to support you in your own spiritual journey. And that all of these shadow aspects are an opportunity for you to realize how insanely powerful you are and what your potential really, really is. So I hope you all enjoyed Caroline Myss' Sacred Contracts Part 3 today. I'm going to leave you with a song that I've played years ago at this point. It was when I first came on the podcast somewhere back in the 280s, 90s, somewhere around there. But this song is called This Little Light of Mine, and it's by Eddie Elliott. And I thought it was the perfect song for today with that Caroline Myss quote from the Bible about putting our light under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine. I hope you all enjoy. Till next time, everyone. Love you all.
And if you're feeling the call to come for a week retreat-style Mystic Manor immersion, remember to go now and book your time to speak with me directly about stepping into the optimistic vortex at calendly.com/talk with Brandon while there are still spots left. Otherwise, I look forward to co-creating magic with you at the Mystic Manor.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All through the house, I'm gonna let it shine. All through the house, I'm gonna let it shine. All through the house, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little